200 square feet, a sliding door, and a frosted panel 4 feet from your deck chair. That is the entire border between you and whoever booked next door. Most people respect it. A handful treat it as a suggestion, and the stories about them do not end with an apology, they end with an itemized charge. 1. 10 o'clock competitive cabin curling. 11:15 blind olive oil ranking, floor seating only. 2:30 90 minutes on the black market in vintage postage stamps, laminated visual aids provided. None of that was on the ship's program. It was printed on a glossy gold-lettered trifold, the kind of thing a small museum hands out at the ticket desk. It came under the door of cabin 7333 a little after midnight, titled The Second Schedule. Denise and Rob read it twice by the bathroom light and agreed that somebody aboard had an expensive sense of humor. The ship's own listing for that morning was a bingo warm-up and a napkin folding demonstration, which explains a great deal. The trifold came from Desmond in 7331. He had decided the entertainment department was an insult to a working adult brain. Plenty of passengers decide that by day 2. Desmond had it typeset. At 5 to 10, the corridor filled up like a theater lobby, then drained sideways through the door beside theirs. 19 grown adults on one queen mattress. A man in a gold brocade dinner jacket at 10 in the morning. A microphone that had quietly left the karaoke lounge the night before and was never going back. All of it inside 180 square feet of standard balcony stateroom. 10 nights at sea, nothing out the window but water and then a slightly different shade of water. By day 3, Denise could identify each event through the wall without getting off the bed. The stamp lecture had gasps on cue. The olive oil ranking had groaning and one genuine argument. Corridor Bache had a wet thud because he played it with 4 oranges and a grapefruit. He refereed in a whisper to keep the noise down, which is its own kind of confession. And the hospitality never stopped. Room service trolleys went in twice an afternoon. Caviar, champagne by the bucket, handed out to strangers who had walked in off a corridor. Nobody paid a cent and nobody was asked to. Free champagne switches off the part of the brain that asks why. The barometer workshop was the artistic peak of the voyage. A water glass, a shower cap, a rubber band, and 40 people cross-legged on his carpet taking notes. 2 decks down, a multi-million-dollar production show was playing to a house that got thinner every night. The crowd doubled and the listings got braver. Day 7 brought veranda water aerobics, which meant filling an inflatable pool from the gift shop with 11 trips of the ice bucket. That is a 2-hour commitment to a joke. The pool gave way down one side during the warm-up. The whole load came back through the open door and across the carpet, taking out his box of spare trifolds and the brocade jacket drying on a chair. Guest services got the call that afternoon. 3 security officers turned up expecting a business. They had seen the pamphlets and counted the foot traffic, and the first thing they asked for was the cash box. There was no cash box. There had never been one, and the question died in about 4 seconds. They told him it was over. No more listings, no more crowds, no more anything. Desmond took it calmly. He asked one question, and it was not about his microphone. He wanted to know whether the complaint had come from 7329. It had not. But that question is the whole story, because 7329 belonged to the forensic accountant his wife's lawyers had hired, the man who had spent 5 months walking through 9 years of Desmond's finances, line by line. Desmond was a commercial insurance adjuster from Sacramento, 16 months into a divorce that had stopped being about assets a long time ago. He had bought the cabin on the far side of that man deliberately. He had paid a designer for the trifolds. Every gasp, every rolled orange, every burst of applause at 11 at night was aimed through one wall at one target who would not get a quiet hour in 10 nights. Denise and Rob were never the point. They were standing in the blast radius. A ship only acts on what somebody puts in writing, which quietly makes the neighbors the enforcement department. Once a complaint is logged, It stops being a conversation and becomes a file clipped to the booking. Desmond signed his at the front desk on the final morning without reading past the first line. $415 for water extraction under the balcony door track. $90 for the microphone. The balcony furniture, carried out on day 8, never came back. On the line for retained property, somebody had written in careful block capitals, "Microphone, karaoke, 1." 2. The smell arrived before the explanation did. Menthol, wet moss, and something like warm hay rolling under a connecting door on deck 5 at 11 at night. Curtis was traveling alone on a 7-night sailing, and he had assumed the worst a connecting door could do was leak somebody else's television. By the second evening, the door itself was beating up like a cold glass in August. He reported a burst pipe, because what else do you call a wall that sweats? There was no pipe. The neighbor in 5013 was Wendell, an air quality consultant from Denver, who had concluded that recirculated ship air is hostile to a working set of lungs. His solution came aboard in a hard case under a layer of folded towels. A commercial cool mist fogger, the kind sold to mushroom farms. He was not humidifying a room. He was running weather. Curtis began noticing things nobody should notice indoors. His paperback swelled to twice its printed thickness. The pages of his passport rippled inside the safe. Every shirt in the wardrobe hung cool and faintly damp, like laundry brought in off the line too early. The bathroom mirror never cleared once in 3 days, so he shaved facing a gray smear that was technically him. The chocolate arrived on his pillow as chocolate and was a brown streak on the pillowcase by morning. When 2 officers finally opened 5013 on the 4th afternoon, the television in there was aglow rather than a screen. Wendell was sitting on a folded bath sheet in swim shorts and a terry headband. He asked for 11 minutes to bring the unit down in stages. Shutting the cycle off cold, he explained, would shock his lungs and undo 4 days of cellular rehydration. What had moved Curtis from polite complaints to refusing to leave the guest services desk was the hose. That morning, a length of clear aquarium tubing had come under the connecting door, felt its way 3 inches onto his carpet, and hissed. A cloud rolled in at ankle height and kept coming. Wendell had run him a supply line so the benefit could be shared. The cleaning was never the expensive part. A cabin held back to dry is a cabin the next sailing cannot sell, and mildew behind a headboard is not a same morning job. The letter reached Wendell 6 weeks after he got home, from the line's guest care office. $1,040, itemized as carpet lift, wall treatment, and 3 nights of loss of use on 5013, charged to the card attached to the booking. The last line thanked him for sailing with them. 3. On the 5th evening, the husband finally leaned around the frosted divider with a speech he had been sharpening since embarkation. He never used it. Gilbert was sitting motionless in the dark at 10:30, wide straw hat, clip-on sunglasses, hands folded like a man waiting for a bus. Getting to that moment had taken 5 days. He had introduced himself on the first afternoon without using a word. A long, silver carving fork came around the edge of the glass, holding 1 wedge of honeydew melon, and hovered. No face, no hello. Just cutlery and fruit at shoulder height. The retired couple next door spent the rest of the week under culinary surveillance. Gilbert had an unnerving instinct for the exact second they sat down with a book. Out came the fork, loaded with whatever he had carried down from the buffet that morning. A folded slice of cold meatloaf. On formal night, 1 whole pickled beetroot glistening. It would hang in the corner of their vision for minutes, waving gently, until somebody acknowledged it. On the 4th afternoon, he got ambitious and balanced a loaded side plate on the ledge of the divider. It went over on his side. He spent a quarter of an hour picking china out of his own cushions while the melon waited above him. Back to the 5th evening. Asked politely, then less politely to stop, Gilbert lowered the fork and nodded once. He whispered that he was building a supply line, and a supply line is useless unless the far end learns the signal. Food leaving a buffet is not a small thing at sea. In a stomach bug protocol, the crew traces where meals traveled. The wardrobe search came the next morning. 14 side plates, 3 carving forks, and a laundry bag lined with cold cuts. $82 for the linen, and the head housekeeper said the same sentence twice, once in the cabin and once at the desk. Serviceware stays in the restaurant, sir. 4. The fitness center spent 3 days hunting 2 missing 10-pound dumbbells. They were 1 deck up and 1 balcony over, pinning down the corner poles of a 4-season expedition tent pitched off Cozumel in 84 degrees. Roy couldn't drive stakes into a steel deck, so he engineered around it. Dumbbells on the poles. Guy lines to the railing and climbing cord, knotted like weather was coming. The 2 friends next door heard it before they saw it. A heavy papery rustle no ship makes on its own. They looked around the divider, and there was the whole thing, swallowing all 35 square feet. The tent's footprint was total. Roy left his cabin on hands and knees, out the sliding door into the zip flap, like a man boarding a very small submarine. 7 nights. Every morning at first light he'd unzip, fire up a butane camp stove and boil water for coffee in a redhead torch, on a ship with a coffee machine every second deck. When the friends finally asked why, he tugged at a quilted-down gilet in Caribbean heat. Beds are a habit, he said, and a habit is a body forgetting what it can do. The air conditioning was making him soft. He was hardening himself for what lay ahead: a 3-hour coach tour, a licensed guide, a scheduled snack stop, climate control throughout. What he never read is that the panel between 2 balconies is a breakaway crossover. In an emergency, the crew put it through in seconds and moved people sideways, and his tent sat flat against it. The stove went into a sealed bag with his cabin number on it and stayed behind the security desk until disembarkation. $140 hit his folio for the dumbbells. The tent finished the cruise folded in his wardrobe, a numbered zip tie through both zipper pulls. 5. By the 6th night, Nadine had told the entire dinner table about her admirer and had narrowed him down to the man from the wine tasting who complimented her jacket. It had started on the 3rd morning of an 11-night Canary Islands sailing. She stepped onto her solo balcony with coffee and found a folded paper elephant standing in the middle of the glass table. A beautiful thing. Sharp creases, a curled trunk the size of a fingernail. She credited housekeeping and went to breakfast. The 4th morning produced a koi with layered scales. The 6th brought an 8-pointed star that opened into a small box, which ruled housekeeping out entirely. Somebody was going out at night over open ocean, reaching around a frosted divider to leave these on her table. 3 of anything, same place, same hour, stops reading as coincidence and starts reading as a message addressed to you personally. So on the 7th night, she sat in the dark corner of her cabin, with the balcony door cracked. She waited, with a name already in mind. 20 to 2. A soft metallic click. A telescopic pole came around the divider, extending in stages, 12 feet of it. On the end was a bulldog clip holding a tiny paper crab. The pole set the crab down, flicked the clip open, and folded itself back into the dark. Nadine was outside in 4 seconds, ready for a face. She got one. It belonged to a woman in her late 70s in a toweling robe, sleep mask shoved up on her forehead, collapsing a window-cleaning pole section by section. The explanation arrived with no apology attached. Folding shuts her brain up at night. Finished animals left on her own table keep it switched on. Nadine's table, she pointed out, was empty. The celebration package Nadine had booked for that same evening was already sitting on her account. Chilled sparkling wine, 2 glasses, rose petals, a blank card, delivered to the veranda at 7 exactly as instructed. Once a gift order is fulfilled, it stops being a booking and becomes a purchase, and the folio does not care who it was meant for. Guest services answered her request for a reversal in 1 line. Delivered as ordered. The $149 stayed on the folio for 4 more nights, and she settled it at the desk on her way off. 6. They slid the tray back in front of his door. Polite, silent, unmistakable. In hindsight, that was the opening shot of a war fought entirely at ankle height. The couple from Sheffield in 6210 had started the week assuming the night steward was simply bad at reading cabin numbers. Second morning, they opened up for breakfast and nearly went over a leaning tower of plates, still glossy, parked dead center on their mat. Odd, they thought, and stepped around it. Fourth morning, a full tray squared up like a place setting, 3 scraped-out shell dishes, a gravy boat with a tide mark, 11 empty ramekins. Lionel, in the junior suite at 6212, had a metabolism that woke him at 1:30, demanding hot food with strong opinions. Garlic snails, a bowl of vinegary octopus salad, a wheel of blue cheese so committed it should have had its own cabin number. What he did not want was any of that sitting outside his own door while he slept, so he exported it 8 feet sideways. Nobody prepares you for the particular insult of a stranger's cold leftovers going stale on your own doormat. So they slid it back, and the corridor became contested territory. 4:10 the next morning, the husband got up for water and heard ceramic dragging over carpet. He opened the door. There was Lionel, mid-crouch in a striped seersucker robe and hotel slippers, steering a plate of snail shells toward their frame with the flat of a rolled-up daily program. He didn't run. He stood up too fast, which sent the octopus salad off the edge of the tray, down the front of the robe and across both slippers. He kept talking as though the vinegar were a styling choice. As a suite guest, he explained, he had paid for a standard of air in his immediate corridor. They were in a standard balcony cabin. Absorbing the ship's ambient smells was simply where they sat in the arrangement. Something happens to people one cabin category above their usual. Somewhere between the welcome sparkling wine and the bigger bathrobe, they start believing they bought jurisdiction. The couple stood there with nothing to say, which he took as agreement. He nudged the tray 2 more inches toward them with a damp slipper. Then he asked kindly that they stop stacking the plates so high, because untidy stacks depressed him on the way to the buffet. Here is the part he never thought about. Every tray on that ship is dispatched against a cabin number and collected against the same one. Room service had known whose octopus was touring Deck 6 since the first night, and the corridor camera only confirmed the choreography. $228 went onto his folio under housekeeping, non-standard, for pulling and extracting the carpet outside both doors. For the last 5 nights, his phone ordered nothing after 11. The system refused his cabin number, and the desk had no override to give him. 7. At 6:15 on formal night, a retired airline captain from Adelaide was standing in cabin 4223 with the wardrobe open, working through the hangers one at a time. The husband held the door for him. The wife offered to open the drawers too, since he was already there. Out in the corridor, 11 more passengers in evening wear waited their turn, and one had brought an empty garment bag along as evidence. None of them had ever met. All of them were certain this couple was holding their clothes hostage. 2 mornings earlier, the husband had stepped out in a bathrobe for the breakfast tray and walked straight into 4 men lined up against the corridor wall, each with a creased jacket folded over one arm. One asked, very politely, whether he was doing the 10 o'clocks. He was not. The 10 o'clocks belonged to Errol in 4225-34 from Leeds, who had noticed 2 things about the ship's laundry service. It took a full day, and it charged like a boutique. Errol charged $15 a jacket, $25 for a gown. Cash, 40 minutes, no receipts. He advertised on cocktail napkins with an extension number in marker, left in stacks by the elevators on 3 decks, which is how a man advertises something he shouldn't be doing at all. The equipment had come up the gangway inside a padded cello case. A commercial upright steamer, stripped into 3 parts and packed in foam, wheeled aboard by a man with no cello and no earthly reason to own one. By the first formal night, the corridor outside 4223 smelled of scorched cotton, spray starch, and hot metal. The wall behind their headboard was warm to the touch. Their swimsuits, hung up in the bathroom, went soft and stayed damp for 2 days. Condensation ran down the inside of the balcony door. Every 3 minutes, the pressure valve let go with a hiss you could feel in your back teeth. And the traffic never stopped. Passengers stood out there in bathrobes and socks holding evening gowns, negotiating in whispers like people buying something illegal in an alley, which at sea is roughly what they were doing. Errol repacked the machine into the cello case every night in case anyone official came knocking, and on the second afternoon he hauled it out to reposition it, and the bottom latches let go halfway across the carpet. The thing came apart in 3 pieces at the shoes of his 1015, his 1030, and a man who had only come up to ask about a waistcoat. 6 hours of knocking, strangers leaning on their doorframe, and that valve. The couple called guest services. 3 officers came up and took the steamer, a folding pressing board wedged behind the sofa, 2 cans of starch, and a bottle of stain solvent. Errol got his warning in the corridor with his own door open, so the whole queue heard it. The crowd melted away. The couple changed for dinner and enjoyed 90 minutes of the quietest cruise they had ever taken. Then the knocking started again, and this time it was hostile. Here is the part nobody upstairs had thought about. When security knocked, Errol had 22 garments hanging in his cabin. Paid for, collected, unpressed, and now unpressable. So instead of handing them back, he tore a page out of the daily program, taped it to his own door, and stopped existing. Closed. 4, 2, 2, 3. Reported me. Your clothes are in 4223. Take it up with them. For 2 hours and 40 minutes, a couple whose only crime was complaining about noise stood in a corridor explaining themselves to a rotating queue of furious people in cummerbunds, which is how a retired airline captain ended up auditing their hangars. Ships do not care much about eccentric hobbies. They care about cash changing hands, because the ticket contract has a clause about running a business aboard, and the second money moves, a curiosity becomes a file with a number on it. Security walked the 22 garments down on a rail and hung them behind the guest services desk, where every owner signed for them by name and cabin. Then they brought Errol down and had him refund his takings, 1 customer at a time, while the duty manager kept the tally on a printed sheet. $486, mostly in 20s. The last man in the line was owed 12 of it and made him count it out twice. 8. They peeled 5 magnetic sea turtles off their own door and set them back on hers, the way you'd return a dropped glove. She took it as encouragement. Marguerite in 2144 had spent embarkation afternoon arranging 61 magnetic sea turtles on her door in a spiral, which the 2 friends in 2146 filed under harmless. By day 3, the turtles had started migrating. 5 appeared on the friend's door in a tidy line, everyone facing hers, like an evacuation notice for reptiles. That was the batch they handed back. The next morning, their door had been annexed outright. A laminated banner across the middle, taped at 4 corners. Turtle Cove, Annex B. Under it, in neon alphabet magnets, both their first names. Neither of them had ever told her their names. They knocked and asked her to stop decorating a door they were paying for. Marguerite opened on the latch and sighed the way a curator sighs at a fingerprint on the glass. No apology. She handed them a slip of hotel notepaper instead, a handwritten invoice. $21.50, itemized, laminating pouches, magnet hire, and on the 3rd line, creative development, signed and dated. The card reader on that door sat behind a sealed faceplate, and her tape had gone straight across the seam. When housekeeping lifted the banner, the housing came away with it, and the adhesive underneath had run down into the slot. An electrician fitted a new plate on the last sea day. The slip went under Marguerite's door that evening. $96, guest damage, door hardware, itemized. 9. Your shower ran 11 minutes. The accepted figure at sea is 4. Please adjust. Green ink, faultless handwriting, ship stationery that smelled of talcum powder, pushed under the connecting door of 3043 before Roz had finished her coffee. She was 44 and sailing alone for 9 nights. She read it twice and binned it. The next morning brought a second one. You closed a drawer at 12:06. The vibration carried through the bulkhead and ended my sleep cycle. The author was Dorothea in 3041, a woman with a fanatical interest in maritime rules that do not exist. Trying to be a good sport, Roz wrote back, "Sorry, I will be more careful," and slid it under the door. Inside 30 seconds, the same sheet came back so hard it skidded under her bed. Her apology had been struck through in red twice. Underneath, in that same beautiful hand, "Noted is not corrected, only stillness corrects." After that, Roz moved around her own cabin like a woman diffusing something, carrying her shoes to the bathroom and setting them down on a folded towel. On the fifth night, she stood on one foot for a full 15 seconds holding a sandal, working out whether putting it down was worth the correspondence. Then she put 9 notes in an envelope and carried them to the front desk. The gap under a connecting door is part of a fire-rated assembly, not a fault, so nothing gets packed into it. The complaint went through as a work order instead. A carpenter came up on day 7 with a drill and a brush seal and closed the letterbox for good. The last thing to pass under that door traveled the other way. A notice from the hotel manager, logging any further written contact with 3043 as a conduct matter. 10. The shortbread was still warm, which meant it had spent time in somebody's pocket. It came across at 10 in the morning, riding an orange souvenir cup along a length of twine, and nobody on Beau and Teresa's balcony had asked for a biscuit. Noon delivered a laminated page from a 1994 almanac about the behavior of rogue waves. 4 o'clock delivered a single AA battery, no note attached. It had started on the second afternoon of a Mexican Riviera sailing. The two of them were out with a glass of wine, watching the light go, when that same cup swung around the frosted divider on a tight line and caught Beau square in the shoulder. Before either of them could get a word out, the twine went taut, and a dry voice came out of the cup, asking whether they had confirmed sight of the tender at 4. That was Alton in 7016-71, who had not touched his cabin telephone since the gangway. Anything with a cord running back to the company, in his view, is a recording device, and he was not having his movements logged by a customer service department. So he had built his own network out of gift shop twine and a plastic cup, the sort of rig people used before telephones existed, only worse. They assumed it was a one-off. It takes real character to sit still while a plastic cup rattles against your railing and a stranger whispers shipping updates into the far end of it. By day 4, Alton had given up on speech and upgraded to freight. A carabiner, a second line, and a small pulley that had certainly not come from the gift shop. Beau decided to be gracious. He wrote 7 words on the back of a drinks receipt, "Thanks, but we are all set here," dropped it in the cup, and gave the twine 2 soft tugs. He thought he was closing an account. What he had actually done was sign a treaty. From that morning, the route was open, the terms were agreed, and the timetable belonged to Alton. On the final sea day, they woke to a full porcelain plate of buffet scrambled eggs clipped to the line, inching toward them, sagging in the middle. Halfway across, the plate tipped. The eggs went over the side onto a sweet balcony 2 decks down, and when Alton lunged across the divider after his plate, his glasses came off his face and followed them into the Pacific. He did not apologize. He reeled the empty line in, leaned around the glass, and informed them they were permanently cut off from his emergency supply chain for failing to secure the payload. The suite below was already on the phone. Things going over the side is the one subject a ship has no humor about, because what sits under your balcony is not always another balcony. Sometimes it is a lifeboat cover, a tender platform, or a crew working area. 2 officers cut the twine and bagged the pulley. Then they moved him. Alton finished the cruise in an inside cabin on deck 2. Fare difference not refunded, where the only way to reach anybody was the telephone. 11. Click. 09:10. The portside civilians are out. The female has cereal. The male has not spoken since yesterday. Morale unclear. Barb had come outside with a coffee. That was the whole crime. 4 feet away, on the other side of a frosted panel, Herb in 10118 held a handheld cassette recorder at chin height and reported on her breakfast at a volume you could hear from the lifeboat station. Herb had appointed himself the ship's unofficial observer, somewhere between the safety drill and the departure horn, and he had come equipped. A folding table dragged to within 4 inches of the divider. An aluminum camping chair that had come aboard flat in a suitcase. Marine binoculars with a compass built into the eyepiece. A shoebox of blank tapes. Ross and Barb, a retired couple from Nanaimo who had paid extra for a midship balcony, watched the installation go up piece by piece on the first afternoon and told each other it would probably be fine. Every 15 minutes, 6 in the morning until 11 at night, he filed a report. Out loud. In the voice of a man reading the evening news over a leaf blower. For the first 2 days, it was all weather. Wind, cloud, sea state, the bearing of every container ship on the horizon. There is a particular calculation that starts running in your head around then, and it involves that recorder, the railing, and the distance to the water. By day 3 of a 10-night crossing, Herb had used up the available weather, so he rotated 90 degrees, and the log turned into a documentary about 2 people trying to eat breakfast. Ross tried diplomacy. He leaned around the divider and asked pleasantly whether the reports could stay indoors. Herb lowered the binoculars, thumbed the button, and answered into the microphone rather than to Ross. 0913. The portside civilians have opened negotiations. I have declined. It was almost admirable, right up to day 8, when the bridge announced heavy weather and closed the balconies. Everyone went inside. Herb pulled a plastic rain poncho over his bathrobe, took hold of the rail, and narrated. He reported that the vessel was riding low. He reported water entering somewhere he could not see. He announced he would be remaining at his post regardless of company preference. At 2 in the morning, the suite 2 decks down called guest services about a man on a balcony shouting that he was prepared to go down with the ship, which is not the call anyone wants at that hour. 2 officers came up and walked him inside at 2:15. When the bridge closes the balconies, it is not a suggestion. It is an instruction from the officer conning the ship in weather, and refusing one of those does not land in a complaint pile. It lands in the log, and the log goes ashore. The tapes were never the issue. 14 months later, Herb went to book the same line's spring sailing, and the reservation would not complete because the flag had followed his loyalty number rather than the ship. It cleared 11 days later, once he had signed and returned a 1-page undertaking to comply with crew instructions. He filled it in by hand in his own careful capitals and kept a photocopy for his records. 12. At 1 in the morning, on night 7, Wes stepped into the corridor in his socks and the carpet held on to him. Not damp, tacky. And the smell was not spilled beer or cheap cologne. It was garlic butter, warm cocktail sauce, and something faintly oceanic that had been out of a fridge for far too long. Deck 9 had been compromised since night 3, when Wes opened his door around 11 to check whether he had left his swim shorts on the rail and found 3 men in dinner jackets standing in total silence outside the cabin beside his. One of them was holding a brass barrier post with a braided rope on it, unscrewed from the photo gallery 2 decks down, and carried up in the elevator like a piece of luggage. They shushed him. They checked their watches. They whispered that they were waiting for the grouper room to open. The grouper room was Casper in 9310, running a speakeasy out of 200 square feet of standard balcony cabin on a 9-night Alaska sailing. By night 5, the traffic outside 9312 had become a public transport problem. Casper had recruited a bouncer off the ping-pong ladder and installed him in a folding deck chair with a clipboard and a keyring flashlight. Wes and Marla were woken repeatedly by strangers, knocking on the wrong door, and then leaning down to whisper the password into their keyhole, which was the pilot boards at dawn. Try sleeping 4 feet from a man guarding a velvet rope from confused tourists in evening wear. The post, it turned out, was top-heavy, and its base was molded plastic doing an impression of marble. On night 6, Casper swept the rope back to admit a couple misjudged the swing, and the whole thing went over into his own doorway at 1:30, in the quietest second the corridor had produced all week. The base split into two pieces. He propped it upright with a shoe and carried on trading. When Wes cornered him by the glass elevators the next morning and demanded he shut it down, Casper showed no shame whatsoever. He straightened his velvet blazer, slid an embossed card into Wes's shirt pocket, and granted him permanent line-skipping privileges. Then came the socks. Wes called security, assuming they were about to break up a serious liquor operation, and 6 officers went through that door at 1:10, expecting bathtub gin and a shoebox of cash. The first man in opened the bathroom, because that is where Gin lives, and found the sink filled to the overflow with crushed ice and something pink packed into it under a folded towel. Then the wardrobe, a laundry bag of ice, same contents. Then the ice bucket, packed solid. 340 peeled jumbo shrimp, chilled and guarded, carried out of the specialty seafood restaurant across 4 nights in napkins, jacket pockets, and 1 clutch bag lined with foil. The main room made less sense than the bathroom. A craps layout drawn in marker on the back of a shower curtain. A roulette wheel built from the turntable out of the buffet's cake display. 11 adults in formal wear, playing hard enough that they had stopped noticing the open door. And not $1 anywhere in the cabin. Not a bill, not a chip, not a coin, because the shrimp in the sink were not a stash. The shrimp were the chips. Casper had built a closed crustacean economy on Deck 9, with an exchange rate, a house edge, and a plan to cash the whole treasury out at the midnight buffet. Food that leaves the galley's temperature chain does not go back into it. It gets weighed and it gets destroyed, and the weight goes on a form. So the entire bank went into a bin liner and down to the waste room while he watched. $410 hit Casper's folio the next morning, $260 for the barrier post, and $150 for the turntable. The line on the food safety report read 9 pounds, 4 ounces. Not one of these people thought they were the problem. Every one of them had a system, a reason, and a completely straight face, and the ship still put a number on it. So where is your line? Would you have called guest services on day 1, or spent 7 nights quietly suffering to avoid the awkwardness? Tell me in the comments, hit like and subscribe.